I picked up Think and Grow Rich, expecting exactly what the title promises: a guide, a formula, something close to instructions for becoming wealthy, written by someone who had studied wealthy people closely enough to reverse engineer what they were doing differently from everyone else. I had certain assumptions going in, the kind most people probably carry into a book with a title like this one: that it would be full of financial strategy, investment logic, something closer to a business manual than anything reflective. I expected charts, or at least the feeling of charts, even if the book itself was written decades before most of the language we use now around wealth building even existed. And in a literal sense, the book does give exactly that: 13 steps laid out about as clearly as a plan like that could possibly be laid out. Desire, faith, specialized knowledge, persistence, each one named, explained, built carefully on top of the one before it, the way a real staircase is built rather than just described. But somewhere in the middle of reading it, I noticed something shifting in what I was actually paying attention to. I was not thinking about money at all anymore. I was thinking about something underneath the money entirely, something the book never quite announces directly, but keeps circling back to on almost every page. The word that kept appearing again and again in one form or another was not wealth, it was mind. Thought becomes reality. Belief precedes achievement. The mind, disciplined in a certain direction, apparently does not just help someone notice opportunity when it appears, it seems to actually shape what they become capable of building in the first place, long before any opportunity is even in view. I found myself reading a book that called itself A Plan for Riches while it was quietly making an argument about something far larger than riches. That the same mechanism responsible for building wealth is structurally the exact same mechanism responsible for building anything at all. Confidence, despair, purpose, emptiness, all of it, according to this book, running through the same starting point, the same narrow doorway that every outcome apparently has to pass through first. That realization changed how I was reading the rest of it. I stopped looking for financial advice specifically and started noticing how often the actual subject was attention, what a person allows their own mind to dwell on repeatedly, until dwelling on it becomes something closer to belief, and belief becomes something closer to direction. Here is the part that stayed with me the longest, even though the book never states it in quite these words directly. Two people can start in nearly identical circumstances, similar resources, similar opportunities, similar starting points, similar disadvantages, even. And yet, one becomes wealthy and one does not. One becomes genuinely content with what they have built, and one remains quietly miserable despite having, on paper, more than enough. The book seems to argue that the difference was never really the circumstances at all. It was what each of those two minds was allowed to believe about what was possible for it, long before either outcome had actually arrived. That is a strange thing to sit with honestly. because it removes a very comfortable excuse. If the mind is really doing that much of the work, then a great deal of what separates one outcome from another was always available, at least in principle, to both people. Not guaranteed, not simple, certainly not fair in any straightforward sense, but available in a way that is harder to dismiss once you actually consider it seriously. I do not think this is only a book about becoming rich. I think it is a book about how the same mind that could make someone rich could just as easily make them poor, or could make them either happy or deeply unhappy, depending entirely on what it was permitted to believe and repeat to itself quietly over years without much scrutiny. Once I saw that, the 13 steps started to look different to me. Not as 13 separate instructions to follow in careful order, but as 13 different ways of describing the same single requirement seen from 13 different angles. Discipline the mind, feed it a specific repeated belief, protect it from the specific repeated doubts that would otherwise quietly take that belief's place, given enough time and enough silence. Desire, looked at this way, is really just the mind being pointed somewhere specific instead of nowhere in particular. Faith is really just the mind being permitted to believe in that direction before there is any proof yet available to justify it. Persistence is really just refusing to let the mind wander back to the belief that it cannot be done, especially on the days when that belief would be so much easier to accept. I do not think I need to remember all 13 steps individually in order to have taken something real from this book. I think I only need to remember the one idea sitting underneath all of them, holding the rest of the structure up. That the mind was never a passive witness to what happens to a person over the course of their life. It was this whole time closer to the actual architect of it, quietly drawing the plans long before anything visible was ever built. I did not finish this book with a plan for becoming wealthy, not in the way I expected to when I first picked it up off the shelf. I finished it with something quieter, and I think ultimately more useful to me personally than a financial formula would have been. A closer look at my own mind and what it has been quietly permitted to believe about what I am capable of without my ever really questioning it in any serious way before now. Not just around money, though that was the book's stated subject, around nearly everything else too. What I assume I'm naturally good at, and what I have already silently decided is simply not for me. What I keep repeating to myself so often and so automatically that it has started to feel like settled fact rather than a simply a thought I chose at some earlier point to keep having and could presumably choose to stop having. Our minds and our thoughts, it turns out, according to this book at least, can help build almost everything a person points them toward. Wealth, if that is where they are consistently pointed. Poverty, if that is what they are quietly left to assume instead, year after year without correction. Genuine happiness, built slowly out of repeated deliberate belief. Or a very convincing, very persistent sadness, built the same exact way, just pointed in the opposite direction the whole time. Not because the world outside does not matter, it clearly does, and no amount of belief alone changes every circumstance a person is handed. But because so much of what a person eventually builds on top of those circumstances seems to start with what their own mind was quietly allowed to believe long before any of it existed in any visible form at all. Maybe the real 13 steps were never about riches at all. Maybe they were just 13 ways of asking the same single question, dressed up as a plan for wealth so that it would be easier to sit down and actually read. If this page stayed with you, if this video stayed with you, I will see you on the next one.